Thank you for joining Navaja's Lunch and Learn on eviction updates and tenant impacts. As you may know, Navaja has had a history of tracking evictions and resources throughout the pandemic with our partner LSNV, the Legal Services of Northern Virginia, and by collaborating on the Eviction Prevention Dashboard. Today's session will focus on a regional update about eviction trends in Northern Virginia, as well as help us understand the long-term impacts of evictions that evictions have on residents and families. We hope to leave plenty of time for your questions and comments and what you are seeing in your own communities, as well as to offer some solutions. As our Navaja partners, many of them affordable housing owners and developers, as well as our service providers, do have some solutions and strategies that are helping to keep people in their homes, but their efforts are not enough. So while evictions impact everyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, income, and age, in Northern Virginia specifically, our most vulnerable population are often low-income Spanish-speaking households. In addition, this population, due to status and language barriers, often earn less money, are disproportionately impacted by rent escalations, receive less legal protections, and are not always eligible or aware of financial assistance, which can keep them in their homes. Therefore, today, after a brief data update on Northern Virginia evictions by my colleague, Hannah Matuda, we are going to hear from our partners, John Francis of the Legal Services of Northern Virginia, Saul Reyes of Bugata, Ingrid Moran of Tenants and Workers United, and Isamar Ortega of New Virginia Majority. They will help us see beyond the numbers to help us put a human face on these evictions. In addition, we want to thank our language justice interpreters, Flor Lopez Trejo and Joanne Torres, who have been strong advocates and patient partners working with Navaja to provide Lunch and Learn in both English and Spanish. So now I'd like to turn it over to Hannah, Navaja's Director of Policy and Programs.
Thank you so much, Jill. And again, thank you everyone for being here with us. Just going to take a moment for us to pull up our slides. Awesome. Well, again, hello, everyone. As Jill mentioned, my name is Hannah Matuda, and today I will be presenting data on evictions in Northern Virginia, focusing specifically on Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William. There are various data sources available for studying evictions, such as Eviction Lab and Legal Services Corporation's Civil Court Data Initiative. For this presentation, we have chosen to use the latter since it provides comprehensive data dating back to 2016. So let's start by examining the graph on this slide, which illustrates eviction filings per 100 renter households per year for each jurisdiction. So in addition to data collected from Legal Services Corporation, we also collected renter population data from American Community Survey. So as you can see, from 2016 to 2019, we observed relatively high filing rates, indicating a significant number of eviction cases in the region. However, in 2019, there was a collective awareness of the significant issue of eviction and its impact on tenants. As a result, each jurisdiction established eviction prevention strategies and allocated resources to address the issue. As we can see from the graph, there was a gradual decline from 2019 to 2020. With COVID-19 taking in full effect around mid-March of 2020, the line further diminishes until 2021, likely due to the statewide NCDC imposed moratoria that temporarily protected tenants from eviction. In light of that, we are now currently witnessing a resurgence in eviction levels, both nationally and locally. In fact, some areas are surpassing pre-pandemic levels. To provide more precise figures, eviction filings in Northern Virginia have increased by 0.07% above pre-pandemic levels. Now, that number might not seem high, but in simpler terms, it's approximately 1 in every 57 renter households in the region who have encountered eviction filings in this year's first quarter. So to the next slide. So the same pattern appears for default judgments per 100 renter households. But what is a default judgment? So when a household facing eviction decides to move without undergoing the complete legal process, it is often referred to as an informal eviction. So this situation can arise when a tenant either lacks awareness of their rights or wish to avoid involvement with the legal system. In the case of an informal eviction, if the tenant fails to appear in court, it leads to a default judgment, automatically ruling in favor of the landlord. Now, with that in mind, default judgments in eviction cases have exceeded pre-pandemic levels in Northern Virginia. Approximately 1 out of every 3 eviction cases in the region have resulted in a default judgment. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, we will delve deeper into each jurisdiction, beginning with Alexandria City. This analysis focuses on eviction filings, comparing the first quarter of 2020 to the first quarter of this year. To illustrate this, let's examine the bar graph. So the green bar represents the number of eviction filings in the first 3 months of 2020, while the blue bar represents the same period this year. This visual representation allows us to observe any changes or trends in eviction filings in Alexandria City. Now, if we look at the bottom, there's a line graph where we will shift our attention to cases ruled under a default judgment. This graph compares the number of default judgments between the first quarter of 2020 and the current year. With that said, allow me to share some key data points that we have uncovered. So in Alexandria, the number of eviction filings remain below pre-pandemic levels. For the first quarter of this year, about 1 in every 37 renter households has faced evictions, and about 3 in every 11 eviction cases have resulted in a default judgment. Next slide. In Arlington, eviction filings are up 12.89% from pre-pandemic levels. For the first quarter of this year, about 1 in every 88 renter households has faced eviction filings, and about 3 in every 10 eviction cases have resulted in a default judgment. Next slide, please. Fairfax eviction filings are up 2.71% from pre-pandemic levels. For the first quarter of this year, about 1 in every 69 renter households has faced eviction filings, and about 3 in every 11 eviction cases have resulted in a default judgment. Next. In Loudoun, the number of eviction filings remain below pre-pandemic levels. For the first quarter of this year, about 1 in 82 renter households has faced eviction filings, and about 1 in every 3 eviction cases have resulted in a default judgment. And lastly, Prince William's eviction filings are up 2.38% from pre-pandemic levels. For the first quarter of this year, about 1 in every 35 renter households has faced eviction, and about 6 in every 19 eviction cases have resulted in a default judgment. And with that said, this wraps up our brief data update. I'll go ahead and turn it back to my colleague, Jill.
Thank you, Hannah. And I do want to let you know that we will make these slides available after the presentation. We have them both in English and Spanish. So thank you, Hannah, for that work and just setting the stage on what we're seeing. Now it is my pleasure to turn it over to our partner, John Francis from the Legal Services of Northern Virginia. He's a staff attorney there to give us additional information about what's happening in our region. Welcome, John.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm the practice group chair for housing, which means that I oversee the housing in the 5 jurisdictions that we just talked about here. I think as far as the trends that we're seeing that exist, we certainly are approaching where we were, and in some cases exceeding where we were before the pandemic. During the pandemic itself, there were a lot of federal as well as local and state resources that allowed for funds to be able to help for non-payment of rent cases. All of those programs, for the most part, are no longer in existence. There are a few jurisdictions that have, after the pandemic, decided to create their own programs that they are funding themselves in order to be able to provide additional financial assistance. We are seeing this in Fairfax. We are seeing this in Arlington, but not all jurisdictions have decided to allocate those funds towards that specific support, which is why we're seeing quite a lot of judgments that are being entered now. I'm not very surprised to see that defaults are on the rise. Defaulted judgment occurs. Usually it's when someone fails to appear in court. So a default judgment occurs because the tenant isn't showing up in court. Some of the time it's because there might not have been proper service and the person didn't realize that they had the court case going on. Some of it could just be the tenant just feeling that they aren't able to do anything about this, and they're just very concerned that showing up in court might somehow negatively affect them if they were to appear. It's a lot of misinformation and not having complete information. What we also see is there are also some very tricky landlord attorneys who will go ahead and ask, do you agree that you owe something? Maybe not all of the amount, but something. And when a tenant agrees that they owe something, a landlord could then bifurcate the case, get a default judgment for rent, and then set a hearing later for what's called final rents and damages 3 months later, knowing that the tenant isn't going to show up 3 months later if they've already been evicted. So that is also something that can sometimes lead to an increase in default judgments as well. I was asked to address some very specific questions that was dealing with kind of a better understanding of entering into surrender agreements. And what a surrender agreement is that rather than going through the full court process, if prior to the filing, there's an agreement between the landlord and the tenant for the tenant to be able to vacate the property. I always recommend that if any of these agreements are to occur, they should absolutely be in writing in order to protect the tenant, to make sure they understand what's going on and what they are agreeing to. The superficial benefits in all of these cases are if you avoid a lawsuit being filed against you, that lawsuit won't appear on your credit. And you also wouldn't have an eviction that would be appearing on your credit. The downside tends to be finding your new housing in the meantime. Usually if you are agreeing to leave early before going through the court proceeding itself can take a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks, even if there's just a default judgment. Where if you're instead of agreeing to leave earlier, you might have less time to find new housing. Especially during this time of year, this is when most of our shelters are completely full. So it might not be easy for someone to find new housing. This tends to be the most strained time of the year because this is the time when most leases are up. So most leases end sometime between June, July, or August. That tends to be because families are looking to rent during this time to make sure that they know for a school year, this is where they're going to be living. But we also have seen a rise in people refusing to renew leases for people that did require assistance during the pandemic. There are restrictions on that. There is a Fair Housing Act restriction that says you can't discriminate against someone based upon source of funds, which includes receiving funds through the county or through the state to assist you at that time. But it's very difficult to prove that that's the reason why a lease isn't being renewed. We're also seeing meteoric rises in rent across all of our jurisdictions. There's about a general 20% increase in rent as well. So people are being offered, yes, you can renew, but now people that might have been on a fixed income, it's now 20% higher. It's adding that additional strain. We've seen SNAP benefits decrease in the last couple of months on a federal level. And there are, the people that are the most vulnerable among us are the ones that are being the hardest hit as all of these things are happening at the same time. I could probably talk about this for days, but I understand. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak now.
John, thank you so much. We really appreciate it and appreciate your partnership with Legal Services of Northern Virginia. It's been an incredible resource for all of us, and we will make sure you have contact information for all of our speakers today if you have follow-up questions that don't get addressed in the Q&A session. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Saul Reyes, who's the Executive Director of Bugata. Bugata is an organization that is working in Arlington County, and I just want to commend Saul and Bugata and Arlington County for hosting the first ever tenant summit a few weeks ago, where a lot of this information for tenant resources around evictions and other information was just shared on a day-long session. So Saul, thank you so much for joining, and thank you for sharing what you are seeing in your community.
Yes, of course. And thanks so much for the invitation and for the data that's being presented. And we also heard from legal services. So it's very good information. As you all know, evictions and eviction judgments is a pressing issue in our community, much important now than ever. And we need to explore potential solutions and highlight available resources, as you mentioned. Along with that is the rising concerns surrounding housing insecurity, and it's crucial to shed some light on this topic. So again, thank you for having me here today. And like I said, it's important to note that eviction judgments can have severe consequences on individuals and families, particularly in those more vulnerable, in the more vulnerable community, which often leads to.
Thank you.
This often leads to homelessness and housing instabilities for these families and individuals. And as you saw in the data that Hannah presented, over the past months, there's been this surge in eviction cases. And as you can see, it's getting to those pre-pandemic or maybe even passing those pre-pandemic levels. And that's due to various factors, such as, people having economic challenges, job losses, and with the expiration of the eviction moratoria and depletion of those financial assistance programs, with all of this comes the need for more rental assistance programs. Also, for many tenants that are facing barriers when it comes to legal representation, this is resulting in unfavorable outcomes in eviction court hearings, as we heard from our colleague in legal services, from Legal Services Northern Virginia. And we need to discuss some potential solutions that could help alleviate the problem of evictions. And as you all know, we live in Virginia, so it's a Dillon rule state that is pro-landlord. And so, but we need to keep pushing for favorable tenant laws. One vital aspect is the implementation of more robust tenant protection laws that would offer greater stability and prevent evictions. We also need to strengthen rent control measures that can mitigate sudden spikes in rental prices. And then again, I know it's, we're in Virginia, it's more difficult, but there are other things that we could do that are potentially more immediate, such as establishing and expanding the rental assistance programs, such as the emergency funds, housing vouchers programs. Those sort of programs can provide immediate relief to struggling tenants. We also need to look to more mediation and arbitration services. These are important and can be valuable alternatives to eviction court. So encouraging negotiation and finding mutually beneficial solutions is important. And I think it's going to go a long way to helping solve this crisis. It's crucial to ensure that tenants and landlords are aware of resources that are available to them. Especially, tenants facing evictions, they need assistance, helping them navigate the complexities of the legal system. That's scary for anyone. When you receive a notice that, a lease violation or that you're behind on rent and you're going to lose your housing and you're already struggling as it is. And to receive this notices, it's very scary. There are local community organizations that provide housing counseling and assistance programs, aiding tenants in understanding their rights and exploring alternatives to eviction. But these organizations could too use support to provide these valuable services. Landlords as well, they can benefit from educational programs that inform them about their responsibilities and alternatives to evictions. So it's important to have collaborative efforts and public awareness. I think that this is key to addressing this issue effectively. This is where stakeholders, including government, community organizations, and citizens, can work together to tackle eviction judgments in this crisis. it's crucial that all stakeholders come together and prioritize housing stability. We need government agencies to allocate funding for affordable housing initiatives and create policies that protect tenants. And community organizations can establish partnerships to provide comprehensive support, including legal aid, rental assistance, and education. I think it's very valuable that we're all here today and we can start having these conversations. I know that there's work already going on, but it's very important that we all work together to accomplish our goals. And so we need to contribute by advocating for fair housing policies and supporting initiatives that promote housing security for all. And I think that together we can strive for a more equitable and secure housing system. And so I look forward to the rest of our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Saul, and thank you for all that you do and Bugada does. I know you are often the recipient of a lot of phone calls and initial outreach when a resident does start to face eviction proceedings. So thank you for being there. I do want to say we are going to, hopefully have time for questions and answers. And since we have such a large group, you can feel free to go ahead and put those questions in the chat. Or save them until it's time and raise your hand. So if you have something specifically for Saul and you want to capture it, please go ahead and put it in the chat. So thank you. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Ingrid Moran. She's the lead organizer for Tenants and Workers United. For those of you who don't know, Tenants and Workers really work in multiple jurisdictions in our region, working in the city of Alexandria, in the southeastern part of Fairfax County, as well as the Woodbridge area of Prince William, and probably other places. So Ingrid, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing information.
Thank you, Jill. Hi, everyone. Like Jill was saying, my name is Ingrid Moran, lead organizer for Tenants and Workers United. So we're a grassroots organization that does community organizing, particularly like Jill was saying, Alexandria, South Fairfax, and Prince William County, particularly in Woodbridge. And so, so we really are living in a crisis, a housing crisis, particularly for our working class families. And so really what's leading up to evictions, it's many things, right? And I can list them down for everyone. And so particularly, I think overall, it's really the lack of deeply affordable housing that, there aren't many, right? There's maybe a few like units that are truly deeply affordable for our community. And so one of the things that we're really seeing consistently in our community is rent increases, rent increments, right? So our families are pretty stable when it comes to living in the same community, but many times what we're seeing now, even during the pandemic and after the pandemic, we're seeing large increments of rent increases up to $100 to $300 every year, right? And so this is many times leading families to move out. Another issue that we're seeing is non-renewal leases. And so many families are all of a sudden they're expecting to renew their lease because they want to continue living in that unit, but they'll get a note from the landlord saying, we will no longer renew your lease. And unfortunately, because of many of the lack of tenant protections that exist here in the state, it's really hard to really fight that off and really defend a case about really convincing the landlord to renew the lease. And so non-renewal leases are a huge thing that we're seeing, and also no leases. And so families are paying month to month. And so that makes it much more easier for a landlord to really evict or have the process of eviction for a family because there are no lease. There isn't, it's a quicker process, right, to unfortunately move out the families. And of course, rent non-payment, right? A lot of families do not, earn enough to pay their rent many times, especially with the impact of the pandemic. And the high cost of rent, it's a big challenge for our families to pay the rent, unfortunately. And then many times our families self-evict, right? And so families, unfortunately, are self-evicting and recognizing that there are consequences, but really leaving them up to no choice, right? So if a family owes $6,000 and they only have $2,000 for them. They think, is this really worth me paying $2,000 knowingly I will not pay the other half, right? They'll think of that can be a security deposit or a rent payment for another unit that I can, move to. And so unfortunately, many families self-evict themselves before they're actually, get a writ from the sheriff, or the sheriff says, this is the date you have to leave. And so we know that there are a few resources that exist where there are rental assistance, but many times it's a very certain criteria. And so not all families will be eligible to qualify for the rental assistance, right? Many times they're behind on rent because they're not working, where one of the maybe qualifications to apply and be eligible is that someone in the household has to work, right? But that was actually the first part of the problem, right? That I wasn't working, or, or I got laid off for whatever reason. And so we're seeing all these big issues that are leading up to the eviction. But I think as an organization, our biggest concern is displacement overall, because we're seeing that many of where our working class families are living are landlords that are, private owners that are at, an interest of having development or density, right? And so we're seeing this as a concern because we feel that there's not enough protections in place, and so to preserve our families. And so I think thinking of development is a really big concern for us, because that can truly lead to displacement, right? And so that's one of our biggest concerns. And so that, I think, is what we're seeing as a problem, and that's a solution. It can be many things, but I think I'll just, say quickly is that we need more local government protections, and not just thinking long-term solution, thinking not just short-term solutions and rental assistance is going to fix the issue, but thinking long-term solutions like voucher programs, subsidized housing, and which many of our working class families can actually apply and qualify to, so they can really have and live in units that they truly can afford, like especially the 40% AMI. And so I'll stop there, and I can share my information, my contact information. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ingris. Really appreciate you and your team and all that you do around the region. Really helpful for you to highlight the self-eviction situation, and of course the need for other resources that all people can access. So I appreciate that. If you haven't done so already, I just put back in the chat how you can select your language channel at the bottom of your screen. So look at the chat to make sure you have selected your channel. Before I introduce our next speaker, we're so fortunate to have Isamar Ortega with us from New Virginia Majority. She's the principal organizer working primarily in Loudoun County. So welcome, Isamar. Thank you so much for being here.
Muchas gracias. Gracias a todos por estar aquí.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you for inviting me. My name is Isamar, and I'm representing one of the most vulnerable communities here in Northern Virginia. Since, as you know, we are in the richest county of the nation. However, we're seeing evictions increasing. And everything that our colleagues have been sharing previously, all those details are happening. And what I'm bringing to the conversation, not necessarily what I think, what I do, but what community members are sharing with me and what I'm hearing from them. New Virginia Majority is a multiracial organization of working class community members, and we work with many campaigns. But in this case, we're working in a campaign of housing justice, of housing with dignity for everyone. The situation here is that there's many displacements, evictions. When the rent increases, it also increases the evictions because there's not a control. There's not a control in rent. There's no laws or measures in Virginia to prevent these evictions. And some of the consequences that we're seeing as well is that whenever we face an eviction, there's also students who are dropping out of school. There's also a lack of essential workers in the area. And local government is not doing anything to try to retain these families working class here. Our community, Hispanic community, is a community that's making less than the income, that's the median, the average in the area. And the salaries, the rent is increasing, but salaries are not increasing. And it's becoming impossible to be able to pay afford the rent. We also discovered through the pandemic that some jobs were lost and they were not recovered. There's not companies that want to develop housing that actually want to support low-income families. Right now in the Canton County, all the companies that are creating developments are working for families that have 80% or more above the medium income of the area. Our working class families that work in the restaurant, that clean the streets, that work in construction, they do not make that income. And they're the people that are impacted the most. But what happens? What are the resources that we have in the area? We can talk a little bit about the resources that we have in the area. Around legal services, we have our hands tied because the legal services that are available, they don't have many of them the capacity to cover services for Loudoun County. They also support sometimes only families that have residency, citizenship status. So many times we don't have representation in the courts. Other things that are happening in our communities is the lack of interpretation services for our language. As it relates resources of rental assistance, there's $12 million in this moment. The board meeting of Loudoun County approved ARPA funding for rent assistance. What have we been doing? For a year now, we have been fighting with the housing department so that these funds are actually provided to the families that need it, that are at risk of eviction. That money is still there. The housing department does not have a plan. So we are letting them know what's happening with these families. I know that I have limited time, but I really care about sharing the challenges that my community is going through. We are doing a survey for a waiting list to turn into the housing development. We have 40 people that are behind with rent. We have 99 people that do not have the capacity to pay all their expenses. So if more than 70% of my paycheck is going to rent expenses, I have to stop buying maybe my medicines, food, or other basic needs to be able to put that money for rent, because as community, we choose to pay the rent before eating sometimes. There's many people that are afraid to not be able to pay the rent this month. What else can I say? What everything here has been sharing, we need programs, housing programs that are really affordable for communities that make less than 50% of the median income of the area. We also need to share to be able to keep affordable housing like parks of mobile housing. We were having some type of rental assistance in programs, and right now, if we do not pay the rent from the 1st to the 5th, you receive your letter for evictions. And yeah, I guess that's what I can share with you all, there's not like language access, and we need legislation laws that are actually supporting the tenants, working class, regardless of their immigration status, their color, their origin. Thank you.
Isamar, thank you so much. Thank you for highlighting the needs that you're seeing in Loudoun and also talking a little bit about your advocacy work that's happening to ensure that the resources that have been dedicated to eviction prevention are actually getting in the hands of the people who need it. So really commend you for all of the hard work there, and obviously with the mobile home communities in Loudoun as well. So I know that's an issue in Fairfax County, and tenants and workers have United have been a great partner there. That's even a more vulnerable population, if that's possible. So we'd like to turn it over to you all to see if you have any questions for any of our panelists. You might want to direct it to an individual or just a general question we can all answer. If you want to put that in the chat, please feel free to do so. Or if you want to raise your hand, I'll just call on you and ask you to come off mute since we have so many people on the call. Or perhaps you have your own observations of what you're seeing in your communities or thoughts for resources and ideas. It's certainly a grave situation, a challenging time for all of us. So please go ahead and feel free to either put your question in the chat or raise your hand. Okay, I have my own questions that I'd be glad to share while you're all thinking. We've talked a little bit about need for additional best practices with landlord and tenant relations, rights and responsibilities. I think, probably many of you on the call have some suggestions. Our speakers, I do want to offer that some of our affordable housing developers are really taking this situation seriously. They're providing the affordable housing in our communities, but at the same time, they realize if people can't afford to live in tax credit housing or rents, where are people going to go? So if you could speak a little bit to any best practices that any of you all see or have ideas about, that would be really helpful to hear. And I don't know if John, if Legal Services of Northern Virginia looks at that, or if you've seen any practices of apartment owners trying to ensure good communication with their residents so they understand what's happening in real time, since our eviction prevention assistance has really changed many times over the course of the pandemic. Are we concerned that residents just don't understand right now that we kind of are at the end of providing resources?
Yeah, so there's a couple layers to that. So, first of all, there was a time when landlords were going, or doing a lot to try to make sure that tenants were aware of certain resources to get money. Those resources to get money are very few and far between now. So although there was a short time when landlords might have been to some extent doing a lot of work to make sure tenants are getting the money, it was so that the money would then go to the landlord. And now that that's been removed, that willingness to help and share that information isn't a priority for many landlords. Most landlords just want, if someone's unable to pay rents, they're just as happy having that person removed for another person to come in. It really seems to not make a huge difference for them, even though that's a lot of, that's a relationship that they built. That's something that at least for a long time, they were able to rely upon for those payments. And now they'd rather just go find another person who is, random, that they don't have that history with, just because their credit might look better. So that is quite the barrier. There are a lot of language barriers that exist. There are certain complexes that, because of the number of residents that they have, they should be providing services and stating and providing information in more than one language, but they are not doing so. And bringing a fair housing complaint about that doesn't prevent an eviction from happening. you will be routinely hear about someone's called in. They said they don't speak English very well, but they had their daughter call or their son call or a relative call, and they refuse to even speak to the relative at all about anything while they're just trying to work out payment arrangements. And in those situations, we can assist with doing reasonable accommodation requests that they do provide some of that additional language. If it is a certain type of federally backed program, then it might also be a legal violation that they didn't do that. That might be a violation of the Fair Housing Act by not having that available, but that's not something that most people are aware of or even considering. And unfortunately, there aren't too many penalties that exist under the state law that's going to prevent an eviction from being delayed. That's truly going to help someone.
Thank you, John. I'm going to move to folks who have their hands raised because we will do our best to address the questions in the chat. If we don't have time, we can send that answers out when we send the PowerPoint presentation and contact information. So I see Joanne Duckett first from Joni from Prince William County. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to go ahead and ask your question or share what you're seeing in Prince William.
Chair, I wanted to address also, as you did, Jill, with the developers and their desire to assist with affordable dwelling units for the community. As you know, Prince William County is in the baby steps of our housing chapter has been approved by the board, and now we're working with the ordinance for that as well. And so we are looking to address the 80% and over. We are looking at a certain percentage of the developers units to be dedicated to 60% or below of households making AMI of 60% or below. And so that is on our radar. We are working with that. The other thing that I wanted to let the group know is that while yes, the funds are limited for the assistance programs, we currently, I know that the Alliance of Greater Prince William County is also has made available ARPA funds to assist with those who needed rental assistance to be able to stay in their homes. We also have implemented a program that began June 5th. It is the Emergency Housing Assistance Program 2. This is CARES Act funding, so it is still related to COVID, but the program is set up for mortgage, rental, homeowners association, because I'm sure that knows that the homeowners association is going after people for foreclosures as well, and then for utilities. So if their families are income eligible and they have arrearages and their income is depleted or has changed their income situation due to COVID, then we are able to assist them right now with those arrearages and current and some future payments. So all that information is on our website. And so the eligibility requirements, the application process is there. And so the only other thing that they have to understand is that if the families have received assistance for this prior, we cannot assist them again for HUD's whole duplication process.
Thank you, Joni, so much. I appreciate that. And thanks to Hannah and John, who did put those links in the chat if you want to go ahead and have that information about Prince William specifically. And now I'd like to check in with Patty Kuntz, who's Planning Commissioner with Prince William County as well. Patty, if you have a question or comment.
No, it's a question. Besides being a planning commissioner, I'm on the board of directors for the Haymarket Regional Food Pantry. We've noticed a 94% increase since 2018. So it's, I'm looking at the stats right now. We are now serving 9,300 families every year, every year now. So my question is, though, I'm wondering if a lot of these people don't know where the information is. Have you ever thought of partnering with the pantries? Give us the information because, they really do talk to us. We're their friends. And we need to know where to send them. We don't. But if we could have, sheets of paper in Spanish and in English, and at least give them a direction that they could go into. That's just my thinking of really partnering with the area's pantries.
Thank you, Patty. That's an excellent idea. So I do hope, the benefit of these learning opportunities is really to kind of make connections with one another. So if you don't mind putting your information in the chat of where to reach you and the food pantry specifically, maybe we can, try to link you up with some of the organizations, working with tenants and residents.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Alice Hogan with Alliance for Housing Solutions. I know, Alice, you've been tracking this very closely in Arlington County, and thank you for all your work on that. So.
Sure. I mean, of course, we echo everything we've heard. These are the challenges, right? We have rent increases, rent balances, utility balances, and I wanted to bring up childcare. I think that we look at these things from a housing perspective, but I think even as housers and certainly as community advocates in general, we maybe start to looking at the other costs that together make life, infeasible. And so what are we doing about their other big costs? And maybe we need to become childcare, affordable childcare advocates as well. Because if you can't afford that, of course, you're staying home because the childcare costs too much, and then you're not working. And as Ingrid said, if you're not working, then you can't apply. And it's this horrible cycle that people seem to be getting into. So I wanted to raise that. Arlington has done a lot. I think it's around $8 million since COVID began that the county has spent trying to support and stabilize families, but the money, like everywhere else, has dried up. And now this past budget, they put in another $3 million. They have a cap of $3,000 per family, and it's retroactive to January. So, if you have a $1,500 rent in 2 months' time, you're out of luck. They can give you that, and then what? So it helps some, but I think it seems like it's only helping, and maybe just as Tony was saying, it's helping people right now. But if you ever needed help before, which, that's going to disqualify you. So it's almost helping. It seems like these programs are helping people right now, or maybe a few people in the future. But anyone who already showed up, eligible from a vulnerability, they're not going to get anything more. And so our kind of question in an inner city or an inner region community is, where are these folks going to go? Like, it's coming to a point where certain households just can't afford these rents in Arlington or in Alexandria, and they're ending up, I guess, going further and further out. I'm wondering if people are seeing more folks showing up in these, western or southern suburbs more, because I think it's coming to the point where they just, these highest rent areas like Arlington just can't support folks, at these rents anymore. So the only other thing I just wanted to mention, we talked to the affordable housing, owners in Arlington, and they're trying to be creative, right? Trying payment plans, trying, what do you call it? Case by case, trying to work with families. This whole surrender idea, keeping people out of that eviction lane is good, but it's like on a case by case basis. I don't think it's really going to be, helpful to all. And then, the other thing I wanted to lift up was that we have churches outside, and Thrive, another group that are trying to help in Arlington. And one of our churches in Arlington, Arlington Presbyterian, ended up making a $200,000 contribution, just a gift to APA, one of our providers, to support families. But how far will that go? I mean, it's a miracle, but it's nothing anyone can depend on. So we see desperate measures for these desperate times, but what is something a little bit more systemic that we can be advocating for? So the only other thing I want to mention is that the fair market rents went up, and I don't know how that affects other communities, but in Arlington, we're in the middle of our housing grant, which is our kind of local rental assistance program, is in a study right now, which will be coming out soon. And we're hoping that some of the result will be that they've opened up eligibility to families and households that prior were never eligible. And the new grants will also be based on a little bit higher rent. So that might help a few folks. So I just wanted to contribute what's going on here. And like the rest of you, no answers, but lots of lots of concern.
Lots of concern. I want to respect all of your time. So understand it's now after 1. If you need to leave, we thank you so much. I do want to thank again all of our speakers. It was really an honor to kind of hear from the ground level about what you're hearing in your communities, and of course your expertise on the legal side as well. And of course our language justice consultants who are so wonderful in helping us to finally be able to offer this simultaneous interpretation. So we will continue to share information and resources with you. This is the most people we ever had sign up for Lunch and Learn through Navaja. So it's obviously a topic of interest. We're committed to staying on top of this and also coming back to you this fall to see where our eviction trends are heading, where the homelessness numbers are heading. We know anecdotally the shelters are full, and I think Alex really echoed a real concern as our mission is to ensure that we have healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities. We're afraid that people are just being priced out of living here in Northern Virginia, in Arlington, Alexandria, but even further out as well. And we wonder where everyone is going to have to go. So thank you all for your interest and your time and your commitment to try to address the situation. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.